Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 146. He's Ross McCorkle. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Tuesday, Steelers Nation. Different feel of the show today. We're going to probably switch to our two-a-week podcast until training camp kicks off in just about 5 weeks from now. Dave Bryan just getting back from his vacation out there in the Rocky Mountains. So today, I am joined by, as I mentioned, Ross McCorkle, who's done a great job for the site. You've heard him before, heard him with Joe Clark on the Depot Dive every Thursday. Ross, thanks for being here. How you doing, man?
I am doing pretty good. I know we're all dealing with some of this crazy heat. The heat index has been in the 105 range here in Nashville. So that's been, I have an upstairs office, so it's been a little uncomfortable, but yeah, overall doing pretty good.
All right, well, I'll try to make it out of this show alive. To jump on into today's show, Ross, the big topic of the day, the NFL announcing on Monday they're going to have the first ever divisional in-season Hard Knocks. In past years, there's, of course, the traditional training camp Hard Knocks, which goes back 20-plus years. In recent years, the NFL has been focusing on a singular team throughout some portion of the season. For the first time ever, they're going to focus on an entire division. And that division is the AFC North, which will include, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers being featured in any capacity on Hard Knocks for the first time ever. They're going to follow the team in the division for the final 6 weeks and for the playoffs. And so it just so happens that Pittsburgh's AFC North schedules all back-ended to the final 8 weeks and, playing all 6 games there. I'm sure that's a total coincidence by the NFL, but that is the story. Pittsburgh, and along with Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, will be on Hard Knocks.
Yeah, it's a clever way to get the Steelers involved and kind of bypassing the rules that are set that, the Steelers have kind of managed to avoid being eligible for the most part. And so, I am excited. Obviously, it's more content for us to, dive into kind of the inner workings of the team. It'll be a little less kind of invasive, I guess, than if they were the sole team being, focused on. And I definitely am interested to see how somebody like Mike Tomlin kind of reacts to this. Is he going to lean into, his Tomlinisms and all of that, or is he going to be kind of standoffish? I know we've heard in the past that Tomlin probably didn't want this kind of thing in the locker room. So it'll be interesting to see how all that works out.
Yeah, certainly from a fan perspective, I think it's really cool. We've never gotten to get that behind the curtain look at this team before. I know they have the standard series. I think it was an upcoming episode they're going to release here pretty soon as well, but that's still a pretty surface level. Obviously, it's fully team control, heavy edits overall. I'm sure the NFL will be careful not to give anything away the NFL or the Steelers don't want to give away that's too secretive, quote unquote. But do you think Pittsburgh willingly kind of agreed to this when the NFL, HBO, et cetera, approached them, or do you think they went kicking and screaming the whole way?
Yeah, I kind of wonder how long they've known, if indeed maybe this was kind of tied to the schedule thing. It certainly looks that way. I can't imagine they would have put up a fuss, but I'm sure maybe behind the scenes, they're probably like at least a little bit apprehensive about the whole process. There aren't as many kind of, I don't know, maybe what you would call locker room issues maybe as there have been in the past, but who knows by that point in the season, if the Steelers enter, I mean, we're talking about the final 6 weeks of the season. That's when things are going to get tough. And so are we going to watch kind of a similar story unfold last year where you had a 3-game losing streak in December? And is that going to be in front of a national audience on HBO?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this team has always been against the idea of the traditional Hard Knocks. I think the Roonies a couple of years ago said they'll grin and bear it if they have to do it. Unfortunately, just have never been eligible and were nearly eligible. Had they not made the playoffs this past year, they would have been eligible for the training camp summer Hard Knocks this year, but that 3-game win streak getting the help in week 18 made that point pretty moot. Again, I think it's really cool from the NFL perspective. It's a smart decision to follow the most competitive and intense and physical division in football. It's going to make for some great, I think, television. I'm excited for it on that personal level. Do you have a concern? And you kind of alluded to it. Could there be a distraction factor? Because having it in training camp is one thing, but you're going to have cameras in there for the home stretch and the most difficult portion of the season, that back half of the schedule, the final 6 weeks or so. You're facing the AFC North, you're facing Kansas City, you got short weeks, you got Christmas games, all that. Is there a concern that this is going to be just an unneeded distraction during Pittsburgh's most important stretch of the entire season?
Yeah, there's at least some concern there. I mean, it's going to be a tough stretch, and I could easily see another 3-game losing streak taking place at some point during that. And we saw what the negative kind of media narratives that came from that last year, and of course there were some other things going on, like the wide receivers not wanting to block and all this. But yeah, I mean, there's at least some level of concern, but at the same time, I do think they're set up pretty well overall. I mean, you got some pretty strong leaders on both sides of the ball. Russell Wilson coming to the offense. I think he's kind of a master of being in front of the media from what we've seen so far. He's very calculated in his responses, it seems like. And so, I don't know if there's, maybe like back when Juju Smith-Schuster was on the roster, somebody that would be kind of leaning into the TV nature of it all. I don't know, what player would do that. Maybe do you see any players kind of wanting to step into the limelight and kind of playing up to the cameras a little bit?
It's impossible to, I guess, say with any certainty. But I guess the format of Hard Knocks is less whether players are being interviewed or the cameras. It's supposed to be this kind of like the cameras aren't there look, where they're just quiet. There's not really a lot of interviews, to my knowledge, and it's just kind of focusing on what actually happens in the sense as if you were a fly on the wall in that locker room. If you and I were part of that team inside those walls, that's what the interactions would be like. So I guess it's less about, could somebody ham it up for the camera, but are they going to capture an intense moment? As you said last year, if you put cameras in that building last year, I'm sure there would have been a lot of intense moments overall to uncover and broadcast. And I'm sure the team just doesn't want that. And just in general, whenever you're sitting there trying to get locked in for a week and you got a bunch of camera crew in the background, you feel that you might act differently. It just has a different feel than just trying to be fully locked in on football, which is what I'm sure Mike Tomlin and this team wants. So, I think the NFL probably sold it in this way of saying, hey, the entire division is being in front of cameras, or at least, being on camera. And so it may impact you, but it's going to impact Baltimore. It's going to impact Cincinnati. It's going to impact Cleveland, all the same. So it's kind of a wash in that sense. And I think typically you hear Mike Tomlin talk about, any sort of adverse situation. I think back to the COVID year in 2020 when the schedule got bounced all around, and Tomlin's whole approach was it's the same for them. It's the same for us. Whenever there's a short week, a Thursday game or the Wednesday game this year, it's a short week for Pittsburgh. It's a short week for Kansas City. It all washes out. So that's probably the best way they tried to sell the team on this, of saying it's going to impact the division equally. It's not going to put Pittsburgh at some sort of unfair disadvantage.
Yeah, and I know I saw, I don't know if he spoke to the media since the announcement or if this was just something he said in the past about Hard Knocks, but I know Ravens head coach John Harbaugh there basically was like, he's apprehensive about this whole thing. He was like, the whole thing's just not real. Whatever you're seeing is very done up and all of that. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting. The Steelers might not be the only ones that are kind of hesitant on accepting this.
Yeah, I think Harbaugh's point was basically saying that no one acts the same on camera as they would if they weren't on camera. You just probably talk a little differently and your approach is a little bit different because you're mic'd up or your buddy's mic'd up or you got a camera crew sitting, in the back of the room. It just has a different feel and tone. So, it won't be Pittsburgh will deal with it. They'll survive. It's not going to be the reason why they struggle. If they struggle, it's going to be for on-field reasons only. But I am excited to watch, again, personally, to see these stories. It'll be on HBO. I think December 3rd is going to be the premiere episode, and it's going to follow the division the rest of the way, because we've never gotten that behind the scenes look at this team before. They're very protective. They've been kind of the highlight's been giving us the Tomlin minicamp speeches, the one last year of reasonable expectations whenever they're going to post issue. That's like as close as we've gotten to really something beyond the surface level interview of this team. So I'm really excited to kind of see some of the storylines. And of course, we'll be writing about it along the way.
Yeah. It'll give us lots of good content, if nothing else.
I know I said that I don't think any player is going to really ham it up for the camera, and the style's not really made for that. But is there one player in particular you're really excited to kind of hear about behind the scenes and maybe get some insight into just who they are a bit more than we already know from what the cameras will show us? Any one player?
That is a good question.
Or coach?
I think I know. Interesting to me, at least, maybe the dynamics along the offensive line. Somebody like Broderick Jones entering year 2. I know Mike Tomlin said last year, or maybe I think it was the end of season press conference, he said that Broderick Jones was kind of stepping up into a leadership role and was kind of in the similar way to Marquise Pouncey in kind of the role he used to play with the team. So I'm interested to see, some of that maybe leadership stuff going on from Broderick Jones, or really just the cohesion of the offensive line in general with some of the new names in there.
I like that. Yeah, I think this offensive line, this mix of young and old, and maybe by mid-season, you see guys like Fautanu step into either starting roles or just more prominent roles, and Jones as a leader. Let me sidebar, and I had this question posed to Dave on last week's show. What is your expectation for the week 1 starting 5? And if I told you who will be the week 12 starting 5 offensive linemen, assuming perfect health, would that answer be any different?
I think I'm pretty sold on Zach Frazier starting week 1 at center, just because, Nate Herbig, as experienced as he might be overall in the NFL, he only has 49 or less than 100 center snaps in his career. And Zach Frazier's entering with, I think he had the most center snaps of anybody in this draft class. And so he's coming in with a lot of experience. The Steelers really don't have anything outside of him. I think I'm sold on him starting. Troy Fautanu, it's kind of a toss-up to me. I mean, he is more experienced than somebody like Broderick Jones last year, but we had to wait until kind of the middle of the season to see him start. Dan Moore Jr., I mean, they've always seemed to like him more than I've personally liked him, but I could see a situation where Fautanu has to wait, a few weeks. But if we're talking about week 5, I would hope that Fautanu and Frazier are both starting by then.
I guess my question is, what would create the midseason change? Because this team seemed to be pretty resistant to that last year. Had Chukwuma Okorafor not said whatever he said to get put in Mike Tomlin's doghouse, he probably finishes the year as the starter, and Jones never works his way into the lineup, assuming good health. When Jones took over for Dan Moore right around that time, week 4, that Texans game when Moore got hurt early, and for the following week against Baltimore in week 5, he played reasonably well, but once Moore was healthy, Moore became the starter again. So I get the thought of maybe you give Fautanu a couple of weeks and then he starts, but I don't know if that's going to work in reality.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, week 5 is the Cowboys game. Week 6, you got the Raiders. There's some pretty good edge rushers in the mix there between those two teams. Actually, week 3, we're talking about Khalil Mack and Bosa and even Bud Dupree. And so there's going to be kind of a gauntlet of pass rushers early on. And, if Dan Moore's struggling at all, I could see that kind of being the impetus to make a change. But yeah, that is a good point. Clearly, Dan Moore was allowed to struggle at various points, last season, and they didn't make the change. That Browns game in week 2, was that when he got the 0 pass blocking grade? Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that is a good point. Something to take into account for sure.
Well, it was a similar conversation last year. He said, well, you're going to start Broderick Jones right away because you're facing the 49ers with Bosa in week 1. The Browns with Garrett in week 2. You were going to get Max Crosby in week number 3. So it's a very similar dynamic. But if I made you though go left to right for the starting 5 for week 1 to put you on the spot here in June, I know so much will change. But just give me that prediction of your front 5 left to right week 1 at Atlanta.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, you said Frazier, you expect to start at center, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the interior, in my mind at least, is fairly set with Frazier, James Daniels, and Isaac Seumalo. And Broderick Jones will be starting on one of the sides, so it's just deciding on Fautanu versus Stanmore. I think I will lean towards Fautanu starting, but we have to. Somebody just said that he's improved tremendously since. Oh, it was Pat Meyer. Yeah, the offensive line coach via Brooke Pryor in an ESPN article yesterday said he's improved tremendously since the beginning of rookie minicamp, and if that trajectory continues, and certainly I think it will and should, and I think he has a good chance of starting week 1, and it seems like that's going to be at right tackle. So I guess left to right, we're talking about Jones, Seumalo, Frazier, Daniels, and then Fautanu.
I'm with you. I certainly think it's possible for this team to go kind of chalk a tackle and keep Dan Moore starting left tackle and Broderick Jones on the right side to begin the year. And where it goes from there, we'll have to see. But I could see that group sustaining as long as they're upright and healthy. But my prediction was like yours, that Jones will be left tackle, Fautanu at right tackle. Yeah, I mean, you saw improvement, or at least heard improvement from Pat Meyer, and that's pretty typical with his system and the way he teaches things, independent hands and just kind of different pass sets. There's an adjustment period overall. I saw that with James Daniels his first year into Pittsburgh, and kind of, it's true for most of these linemen overall. There's kind of an acclimation period. Seumalo, I think, had to deal with some of that last year. So we'll have to really monitor that. But I think Fautanu being more experienced and older than Broderick Jones was, to look at that comparison, a more veteran, I think more day one ready kind of guy than where Jones was coming out of Georgia, is going to give him the edge. And so that's my belief, but we'll have to go into camp, and of course you'll have to earn those spots in those roles.
Yeah.
Anything else with Hard Knocks to kind of flip back to that? I mean, what is your main takeaway? Are you excited about it? Are you concerned? Like, what is your prevailing feeling when you heard the news that Pittsburgh will be featured on the show?
With the schedule there at the back of the season, I mean, like I said earlier, I am a little concerned that it could become a thing. I mean, last year we had Mike Tomlin calling a emergency midweek presser that he doesn't normally do. And so if we find ourselves in a few game losing streak, that could kind of intensify at least some of the media narratives. And we saw how that unfolded last year. So there is some concern, but overall, I'm excited to see the behind the scenes, and I'm hoping it'll be a positive experience.
Yeah, no, I get that completely. I think there is that potential concern, but I come away more excited than concerned. I'm concerned about the back end of the schedule just in general, but again, if Pittsburgh struggles and loses, it won't be because of that. Will it be magnified because of the show? Sure, but that'll be the least of the teams or the fan base's concerns. And again, I'm excited because we've never really gotten that look behind the veil of the team before. I'm just mad I'm going to have to go get HBO or Max or something because I don't have it. So it's another thing the NFL is going to make me sign up for.
Yeah. What was maybe Melanie Friedlander, one of her terrible takes was the cost of being an NFL fan and all the different subscription services that you have to have now. And of course, Netflix on Christmas. And yeah, it's a mess right now with that.
Yeah, it is expensive for sure. All right, Ross, you had written over the weekend, and this post got a ton of traction. I even hear some of the TV shows kind of referencing it, I think, because you highlighted and put a spotlight on the story. So kudos to you for that. But Ray Fittipaldo, one of the beat writers, works at the Post-Gazette. I think it was a radio interview. You can tell me the source better than I can, probably. But Fittipaldo was giving just his take on Justin Fields' spring performance in OTAs and minicamp, and highlighted some of the big plays and ability and talent that Fields has always shown, but talked about that his accuracy and ball placement were problematic, and problems that were following in from Chicago still existing in Pittsburgh. So your takeaway overall on hearing some of that information from Fittipaldo on Fields?
Yeah, it was via SiriusXM's press coverage show that Fittipaldo was interviewed, and I mean, it's not like the most surprising story to see. I mean, he's a QB2, and so he's not getting, as many reps as somebody like Russell Wilson. He's still the same guy he was, exiting the Bears. And while he did progress year over year as a passer in terms of his completion percentage, his passing yards, his, adjusted net yards per passing attempt, they all went up. trended, linearly upward over his 3 seasons. But even with the progression in 2023, his adjusted net yards per passing attempt of 5.29 is the exact same number that Kenny Pickett offered the Steelers in 2023 as a second-year player. And so I think everyone agrees that that was nowhere near good enough. And if that's Justin Fields' best mark after 3 seasons, I don't know if this is like a huge surprise to hear that he's not terribly accurate. And some of those knocks that he's had kind of coming in still exist. That's going to be the case. And just kind of looking at, I mean, I don't know if we can just assume. I think there is at least some people assuming that, he was with the Bears. The Bears were a poor team. And so, he just needed a change of scenery. To a certain extent, maybe some of that is true. However, with the Bears, he had 2 whole different sets of coaching staffs there. So it's not like he just had one system he was operating under that entire time. The first year he had Matt Nagy, John DeFilippo, and Bill Lazor. And then for the next 2 seasons, he had Matt Eberflus, Andrew Janocko, and Luke Getsy. So he's several coaches have kind of made their mark, left their mark on him at this point. And, while there's been slight improvements, there's nothing that would suggest that he can be a, long-term franchise quarterback to this point, similar to how we viewed, Kenny Pickett after last year.
Yeah, I think for Pittsburgh, their calculation is less about a change of scenery and just some stability, because I think Fields really didn't have that, lacked that in Chicago with a lot of turnover, a lot of turmoil. I think, Eberflus has been under the gun as a head coach. Ever listen to one of those Bears press conferences? The Chicago media is brutal. It is night and day compared to Pittsburgh. And, Chicago was a worse team last year, so that kind of comes with the territory, but they really grill that guy. So it just is a different feel, I think, in Chicago than it is going to be in Pittsburgh, and hopefully feel a bit more stable. And of course, if Fields is the backup, there's just less heat on him, and all the focus is on the starter and the guys playing, which might give Fields some time to develop in that regard, clean up and refine his technique. But yeah, I mean, to the report, it shouldn't be shocking because, as you said, he's not that far removed from Chicago. He's playing games for them 5-6 months ago. So it's not like he's going to magically be a different quarterback with a couple of practices here in Pittsburgh. I'll have to get eyes on it. I mean, it's obviously hard to speculate too much on somebody's evaluation without really seeing it. And again, they're in, helmets and shorts. And so it's not really a true football environment. You hope a quarterback would look really good in that environment, but without us really being there, it's hard for me to offer too much commentary other than to say, as you pointed out, that's kind of who he's been overall. So the report shouldn't be shocking, and nobody should expect Fields to magically be fixed because he went through a couple of mini camps and OTAs as a Steeler.
Yeah, where do you come in at with, like, what do you do with Fields in terms of his contract's up next offseason? Obviously, I've heard some chatter from some of the local beat writers in Pittsburgh that, maybe they could look at a contract extension, prior to the season. Do you think that that's possible at all? Or are we looking at kind of kick the can down the road and just figure this whole thing out later?
Dave and I have touched on it some, and if they want to re-sign Fields to an extension, if he's willing to do that, I mean, I'm probably okay with that. It depends on the money, of course, but it shouldn't be anything too crazy. I just don't know why Fields would want to lock himself in without really knowing how things would go in Pittsburgh and not quite sure what his role is going to be. And what if he goes out there and has a great year overall and then he costs himself money? Or what if, he signs and then Russell Wilson plays fantastic and Pittsburgh wants to re-sign him and does, and then Fields is cemented as the backup? If I'm Pittsburgh, I don't know exactly how this is going to go. I get the trepidation and the concern for not having a quarterback under contract in 2025 with Wilson, Fields, and even third stringer Kyle Allen, scheduled to be free agents, but I'm going to let the season play out. I'm not going to commit right now. There's so much new with this team, new offensive coordinator, new quarterbacks coach, obviously new quarterbacks themselves. I'm not going to commit. If that costs me some money down the road where I got to pay somebody extra because they had a great year, good. I mean, I'm happy to have a good quarterback. I am more than willing. I'll have a big smile on my face if I pay a good quarterback, whether that's Wilson or Fields. And so if I'm Pittsburgh, I kind of let this season ride out, because you just don't know how it's going to go. This time a year ago, we're talking about Kenny Pickett and his progression, and the summary is a great preseason. The offense is humming, and everything falls apart by the time December rolls around. So much can change. I just think it'd be a little too risky to try to commit to a quarterback right now, whether that's Wilson or Fields. Let the year play out. Let these guys, have their successes and failures and see who the best quarterback is. And you'll have that decision to be made after the season with the hindsight of how the year goes.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about with in terms of if he kind of locked himself into a deal and then shortchanged himself, and for the future, say, Russell Wilson goes down midseason and he plays, 6 games and he plays all right, then his value will be higher than it obviously is right now. And the Steelers have been pretty clear cut and dry on the whole. They don't want hostages. They want, volunteers. If somebody like him, signs a contract and later determines that, maybe that wasn't the correct choice, the Steelers have been pretty amenable to granting people trade requests and stuff in the past. I feel like that's something to at least have in the back of your head if you're Justin Fields.
So you think if he were to sign a deal and then if like Wilson plays well and he stays, then you trade Fields? Is that kind of what you're theorizing?
Well, if Fields ends up playing well and his value goes up, and he were to have signed a maybe a 1 or 2 year extension, prior to the season starting, it would be pretty easy for him to just request a trade. I feel like, given the Steelers' history of granting those requests.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly right. They have the volunteers, not hostages model, but I mean, I think he'd want to stay in Pittsburgh. If he plays well in Pittsburgh, then maybe Pittsburgh was the secret sauce all along, and maybe you can try to either just play out your contract and cash in again with another good year. He's still pretty young. I mean, he wanted to come to Pittsburgh. I mean, that was the one team he wanted to play for if Chicago was not going to keep him. So that's all I know. We're just talking and theorizing and down the road type stuff, and probably all decent problems to have if you find a quarterback like Fields that's showing promise. But yeah, if I'm just Fields, I'm not going to lock myself in. I mean, I know the argument is, if you're Fields, what if you're the backup basically the entire year? You do a little bit of specialty package stuff, but Wilson is the guy and starts all 17 games and plays well, and you play 100 snaps in total. What's your market going to be like after this year? It was pretty clearly a light market for him from the trade aspect. This year, nobody envisioned him as a starter. Probably no one would envision him as a starter for 2025. And so you may want to cash in if you have the chance to do so right now. But I'd bet on myself if I'm Fields and let the season kind of play out. And even though I'm sure he's excited to be in Pittsburgh and has said the right things, I still wouldn't sign a contract after being with a team for 3 months and not really quite sure how the organization will go, my standing, Wilson's standing, the future, all that kind of stuff. So for me, for the players, for the organization, there are just far too many variables to try to guess at here before the year begins. I would let the year play out. It's probably best for Wilson, for Fields, and for the team to not commit until there's some product in Pittsburgh to be shown to commit to.
Yeah. I guess I'm just, kind of selfishly trying to avoid writing about, 15 different quarterbacks again next February and March as we did this year. But
no, I get that. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be in this constant turnover, but I mean, I think you kind of have to just let the season go out and hope that one of these guys, Wilson or Fields, is worth re-signing. And if they are, then you pay him whatever it takes to resign after the season before free agency. I think. Well, I mean, these quarterbacks chose and wanted to come to Pittsburgh. Wilson could have gone to different places. He wanted to come to Pittsburgh. Fields wanted to come to Pittsburgh, and so I think they're going to probably be pretty inclined and keen on signing with Pittsburgh if they play well. And money is going to always be a factor, but Pittsburgh, I think, will be willing to spend it if there's a quarterback that's finally showing that they can play and lead this team to success.
Yeah. And one more thing on Fields here. During, I think it was the number one Cochran show on KDKA on Sunday night, Mark Cabali was basically saying that this competition is not a competition, saying, Russell Wilson could have the worst preseason of his career. Justin Fields could have a 2023 Kenny Pickett-like preseason, and they would still start Russell. I mean, do you see that? Do you take that as kind of factual at this point? I mean, I kind of do, but is there any situation in which Fields wins the job in your mind?
Any's a loaded word to use, but I'm basically with you, and I've had that thought as well. I've written about the last couple of weeks that I think this is 2022 all over, where technically Wilson has not been cemented as the starter, but I really don't see a path unless either, of course, he gets hurt. I really don't see a way for him to not open up the year at Atlanta. I think that he's the veteran, he's the leader. I mean, just the way that he's carried himself. I mean, the way that Wilson has acted in terms of with the media, his teammates, and probably most of the reps in the spring. Is there any indication that he's going to be the backup for this team right now?
Right. And then
I just don't see it.
Yeah, I agree.
But I do think it's going to be a conversation, at least from you and I and Dave and the media. I think Fields could have a really impressive preseason because I've said this before. I'm going to say this again a couple times. I'm sure before camp begins, he's going to be the backup, the number 2 most of the time. So he's going to face backup defenses with rookies and journeymen, and guys are just not as physically as talented as he is. Fields is an immensely talented quarterback with the traits and the tools, and so going against his backup Eagles defense in practice and then facing preseason backup teams. I mean, Fields at his best makes starting defenses and starting players look silly at times. There's some terrible inconsistency in this game. That's why he's not the full-time starter and the backup in Pittsburgh. But at his best, he can make anyone look just miserable. And so imagine what he'll do to a group of backup defenses in a preseason game of a group trying to play together as an 11-man unit. Fields is going to make some plays this summer, and that's going to just naturally create buzz. Should he start, should he play? Because I'm sure Fields is going to have some really impressive moments in the preseason. So it's going to be a conversation, but I think internally for the team, I really, Wilson's being viewed as the front runner to use the pole position, to use the kind of the racing term. I'll use a different term to stick with racing, but to describe Wilson, he's not the pole position guy. He's the pace car. He's out in front. No one can pass him. No one will pass him. And so I think that's kind of the way that I'll frame this. He's more pace car than he is pole position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, going back to Justin Fields' 5.29 adjusted net yards per passing attempt, that was the same that Kenny Pickett had last season. And something weird about that number is that was the number that Ryan Tannehill had the season before he started working with Arthur Smith in Tennessee. So all 3 of those guys, 5.29, and Tannehill went on to have, a Pro Bowl season and improve that number to 8.52. So there are examples of quarterbacks making kind of a sizable leap over 3 yards of adjusted net yards per passing attempt, which is a huge jump by Tannehill. And so, I certainly think going back to Fields and his kind of long-term potential at the beginning of this conversation that we started here, there is some hope. I don't want to paint,
Sure,
the picture that he's completely toast, but it is going to be kind of difficult at this point to turn things around after 3 full seasons.
Yeah, I don't want to say there's no chance. I just think out of the gate, Wilson's going to be the guy, and we'll take it from there. That'd be an interesting study. How many quarterbacks have seen their adjusted net yards per passing attempt increase by at least 3 1 year to the next? Tannehill being one. I wonder how many other examples there are. I'm sure not many, but maybe in kind of the last 20 years, how many quarterbacks have done that? I'd be curious to see what that list looks like.
Yeah, sounds like something I'll maybe work on later.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Also, kind of from the beat writers, a little bit of, I don't want to say concern, that's probably too strong, but maybe disappointment or just a note, at least on rookie wide receiver Roman Wilson. We heard it from Fittipaldo. We heard it from Brian Batko of the Post-Gazette that they came away less than impressed with Wilson. I think Batko said he didn't look quite as ready as he maybe thought, and Fittipaldo's been pretty consistent talking about that Wilson looks a lot thinner than he expected. Matthew Marksy has an article this morning. Are these reports cause for concern? Ross, where do you come in on some of the, not glowing initial evaluations on Roman Wilson?
Yeah, I don't know how concerned I am. I don't know if I was ever, on board with him stepping into the wide receiver 2 role as a rookie. I know Deontay Johnson kind of did. I think he ended up getting the most targets or close to the most targets in his rookie season there. And, they are similar sized. If you look at their profiles coming out of college, what is it here?
They were pretty close. I think you're right.
Wilson was 5'10" or 5'106", 185 pounds. Deontay Johnson 5'104", 183 pounds. So, just a couple eighths of an inch and 2 pounds of difference. So we're talking about two guys who are similarly sized. Obviously, if you're that size, you're going to need to win with your route running and your quickness and stuff like that. And that's some of the stuff that will probably take some time for Wilson, just coming out of college in a run-first offense. And you're talking about a guy who only played 94 wide snaps last year, 18 the year before. He's primarily in the slot. And so if they do want him to ever be on the outside, I think it's reasonable to expect that to probably take, some time, maybe by the end of his rookie season or maybe year 2, we can maybe start to see some of that. But I don't know if they were ever really fully trying to count on him to be kind of the second option opposite George Pickens there.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair evaluation overall. And in body type, I'm with you that Johnson and Wilson look pretty similar, but I think in terms of just their college experience, it's different because Johnson was that outside, more X receiver at Toledo, and there was probably a lot more attention on him while they were both number one receivers in their offense. You had Michigan, which was so effective with the ground game and just had so many weapons and talent overall that Wilson probably wasn't as focused on as I'm sure Deontay was at Toledo. And so I think Johnson probably was just more year one ready, being on the outside more and having to work his releases more and just probably seeing that attention a bit more than Wilson has, because in Michigan, he got to play in the slot, as you said, a lot of free releases, didn't have to work at it probably quite as hard to get open as Johnson did playing up there in the MAC. But I will say this, is that I think one thing Steelers receivers have shown to get better at is to kind of get stronger. I mean, AB, people talk about kind of what made AB turn into AB. It's probably a variety of factors, but I think he just got a lot stronger whenever he came out, because he was super. I mean, his weight never probably got. I mean, he came out like 180 pounds. What did AB come out out of Central Michigan? 185. What do we have? This is you're adopting our Dave model of him and I just researching stuff here mid-show. 186 listed at the combine. I think he had gotten up in the NFL at his highs to like 195 or 198, somewhere in there. So he did add some weight. We just got more muscular and stronger, and that was really critical for him. Winning at the catch point and beating press coverage. I think Deontay got stronger as well. Certainly not, I would say, to the degree that AB was able to do, but I think he was the guy that got more strength, and coming from a Toledo program to the NFL will do that for you. Now, I know obviously the camp coming from Michigan, Wilson is, it's a big time program, but I think he's the guy that can probably fill out that frame a little bit more. Never going to be huge, but more functional strength will be really key for him. So yeah, my expectations year one for Wilson are pretty tempered overall. I don't have exact numbers on that. I'll have some guesses closer to the start of training camp and probably closer to the start of the season. But I take it these things with a grain of salt right now until I get eyes on these guys in training camp.
Yeah, how much? Because you wrote way back when Arthur Smith was brought in as the offensive coordinator. It was goodbye slot receiver, hello fullback. Mm-hmm. If indeed Roman Wilson is kind of confined to the slot role, what kind of how much usage will he even really receive?
In terms of snaps or targets or all the
I guess
above?
Both, yeah.
Yeah, again, I'll have to kind of sit down and think about that. We know that Arthur Smith used 11 personnel, a league low 17% of the time last year, despite Atlanta being a 7-10 team that wasn't exactly sitting on big leads. And so they are a multiple tight end offense through and through. I think, if we're talking maybe 20 or so receptions as a rookie for Wilson is probably kind of what's in my head right now. I don't want to put that in stone, and we're just all speculating, and injuries can change things pretty quickly, obviously. But I think 20 receptions is kind of my loose expectation for what Wilson will walk away with his rookie year.
Yeah, I think that's probably in the ballpark there for sure.
Who has more receptions this year, Roman Wilson or Darnell Washington?
Ooh, I think I'll go with Darnell. I know a lot of people are kind of a lot of people are pretty set that he's kind of just a blocker, but I think last year we heard from Alfredo Roberts during the bye week, and he said he's coming along as a receiver. And obviously Arthur Smith's system is tight end friendly. I think if you look at his kind of number one and number two tight ends over the last however many years. The number 2 tight end, did get a fair amount of usage there. And so I could see Darnell Washington, I hope he gets more involved. I think he has the athleticism and he's huge. I mean, at least get him involved in the red zone or, in certain situational football kind of moments there. But yeah, I think that's a good kind of mark. Probably will be close between the two.
Yeah, I think Washington's going to play a bunch, and that's going to just probably naturally lend itself to some targets. I'll still give the edge to Wilson in overall receptions, but it might be close overall. It's kind of one line that we'll have to watch. And so again, we'll see. This whole receiver situation behind Pickens is super muddied right now. It's hard to really make heads and tails of who's going to be the guy, and of course, any outsider brought in can totally flip the whole situation on its head, and likely and hopefully for the better. So you go into camp and kind of see what these guys can do. But I think to the point, back to Wilson, there's going to be a learning curve for him in a lot of ways. And so I would not expect him to be hyper impactful out of the gate.
Yeah, and with the wide receiver situation in general, the past, I don't know, week and a half, 2 weeks have seen a lot of kind of positive reports on Calvin Austin III entering year 3. It's really kind of just year 2 for him because he didn't play at all his rookie season. Where are you at with Calvin Austin III? Are you buying some of this hype? Are you kind of hesitant where are you at with him?
I'm still hesitant. I mean, I'm excited and it's good to hear. And it's certainly notable, especially to hear from Zach Azzani, because he's not one to just dish out compliments to everybody. He's a pretty tough love coach. And in the interview in which he praised Austin up and down, he was a little more probably subdued in his comments on George Pickens, a little more down on the group as a whole on that particular day. So they did not have a good practice that first day of mini camp, and talked about kind of getting on Roman Wilson to really coach him hard and try to coach him up as quickly as possible. So that's certainly encouraging. I've been more down on Austin than probably most fans have been, just because I wonder, is he more than the speed guy? And I want to call him a track guy. He's a true receiver. He was a great receiver in Memphis, made some big plays, but outside of that straight line speed, I don't know how much I've seen from him overall. Is he running a full route tree? His catch radius is super small. I know he's a small guy in general, but I mean, he's really struggled to make any sort of receptions outside his frame in his NFL career, which granted is pretty limited, but even looking at his first training camp and all of camp last year in the preseason and his first full regular season, does he have the greatest quicks underneath? I mean, for a small guy like him, it's okay, obviously, but I don't think it's where it could be compared to some other players. And you would just generally expect those smaller, faster guys, good athletes, to look good in settings like this. So it's not a huge shock to me. Now, I think he's a really hard worker, and I think he's a really willing blocker and does all the little things well. I highlighted that last year. So I think he's going to work really hard and bust his butt, and that's going to endear himself with the coaching staff. But I'm a little more wait and see on Austin until we're in pads and kind of with some more game situations, because I think body types and athletes like him typically look good, and they're supposed to look good in these type of settings like spring ball.
Yeah, that's fair. And I just, the thing that I keep coming back to is, Russell Wilson's kind of signature trait over the course of his career, other than maybe his moving around the pocket and escaping pressure and stuff, is his ability to throw a really pretty deep ball, get a lot of air under it, let his receivers run kind of under the ball there. And the Steelers haven't had one of these deep threats in a while, so it's kind of a foreign thing for the team. But could Calvin Austin emerge as what, he had that 72-yard touchdown last year? Could we see, maybe not many of those, but could we see 3 or 4 of those this season?
Yeah, sign me up for sure. But this receiver room, one thing it does have is speed. Quez Watkins is fast. Scotty Miller's fast. Calvin Austin is fast. Roman Wilson ran really well. He's a fast guy. And Pickens is more that long stride glider, but he still ran, low 4.4s coming out of Georgia. And that was coming off his torn ACL too. And so he's maybe even faster than that now. So there is a lot of speed. Will that be a separating factor for Austin? He may be the fastest guy there and the biggest true vertical threat, but it's not. It's a pretty speedy room overall that may not give Austin the edge it would in other receiver situations.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that you're hearing from OTAs, or anything else you wanted to talk about from what you heard kind of over the last month or so that might have been notable to you there, Ross?
Did you guys talk about, you wrote about Peyton Wilson and you're buying some of the hype on that. Did you guys talk about that on Friday there?
Yeah, I think I did some. I think I talked about it before I wrote about it. And that is one, where the buzz, I know it's still spring ball. And granted, he's an athlete, but that's a guy where I just watching him on tape and knowing that he was a first round talent that really fell to the third round because of the medical concerns. It wasn't really because of his game or issues with him as a linebacker itself. I'm kind of permitting myself to get more excited about him than I am probably some reports on these other guys. So I don't know exactly what that year one's role is going to be. If Cole Holcomb is going to return to play sooner than what I initially thought a few months ago, where he may be ready for camp and be ready for week one. You got a bunch of inside linebackers in there trying to delegate roles. Again, good problem to have with all the injuries they had there last year. But that's a guy that I think, is going to find a way to play some relatively significant snaps as a rookie.
Yeah, I think he's one of the guys I have circled as, who I'm most excited to hear about at training camp. Do you kind of have a preliminary list of maybe 2 or 3 guys that you're most looking forward to seeing?
I try not to go into camp. I mean, I'll write about it and we'll talk about it, but I just go into camp with try to have the most open and broadest view and scope possible, so I don't get too hyper fixated on one thing. And the guys to play well and the guys that I'm looking for, I'll just naturally end up watching them over the course of 16 practices. But Wilson's certainly one of them. I mean, the receiver battle in general, some of the young offensive linemen, Dylan Cook in year 2, I think it's a really big year number 2 in Pittsburgh for him. That's a guy I really want to see, developing well last year in the summer, compelled this team to keep him on the 53 because they would have lost him almost certainly to waivers had they let him go. Guy that has not played a ton of offensive line in his career, was a college quarterback for his first couple seasons. And so that's a guy that really could have, I think, swing tackle potential entering 2024 if everything goes right. So that's one name that comes to mind. But I mean, the whole roster, of course, I want to go check out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone on your list that I know you probably won't be there for any practices, but anyone you're wanting to hear about and for me to write about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd say kind of just following the momentum of the spring practices. Calvin Austin III, who we've talked about, is on that list. I'm kind of maybe a little bit more buying the hype. I just go back to, and this is before he ever played an NFL snap at all, but I just always go back to the Ravens picking one pick after the Steelers and just being upset that the Steelers swiped him out from under them during that draft. And, a lot of that hype was lost over the course of his, foot injury in his rookie season. And then last year, I mean, how much was the offense even really able to support 2 receivers, let alone, get Austin involved? And so, hopefully this is his best opportunity with no clear 2 option right now to kind of break out or have some kind of upward trajectory of his career. And so I'm excited to see that from Austin. I'm very excited for just, I guess, the secondary as a whole. I think it has a chance to be the best spot it's been in quite a while. I've seen kind of mixed feelings on Dante Jackson. I did a couple of film rooms on him and came away pretty impressed overall with his ball skills and he's just kind of willing to throw his body around and pursue the football and all that. And so I'm excited for Dante Jackson as well. And, maybe see the reason why Mike Tomlin's been after him for so long. And so those are a couple of guys on my list.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ross. When I watched Jackson on tape, whenever they first made that deal with Carolina, I didn't see a corner that looked completely out of place, and a guy that reports were that the Panthers were about to cut him if they couldn't find a trade partner. And I know he reduced some of his salary in Pittsburgh this year to make that cap situation more manageable as well to boot. So he's not going to be a great corner, but could it be a number 2 that can play that supporting role? Yeah, I think I think there's a chance he could overall. And I wrote about on Monday. I'm just really excited about this defense in general with the health of this team returning and this team being the number 6 scoring defense last year, despite all the injuries, and they were top 10 in takeaways, and they were great in the red zone and pretty good situationally overall. I think with the health of this team, the additions of Jackson, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, year 2 guys that will ascend and grow even more, Keanu Benton, Joey Porter Jr., etc., Nick Herbig. This is a defense that I think can be top 5 in scoring, can be top 5 in sacks, can be top 5 in takeaways. You had Minka back, who didn't have a takeaway last year, and Pittsburgh's defense still forced 27 of them. I'm putting, I think rightfully and reasonably so, high expectations on this defensive unit here in 2024.
Yeah, and hand in hand with the defense, you're talking about hopefully a much improved punting game. And so we're talking about hopefully much better starting field position for the defense, and that'll play into, keeping the score down and all that as well.
That's a great point. Punting is your first line of defense. It sets the tone for your defense is going to start, and it's hamstrung this unit, this defensive unit. The punting has the last couple of years. They've been consistently bottom of the league, bottom third in gross average, and the net's been down there too. So I think Cameron Johnston is one of my favorite offseason additions overall, just for having some solidity at punter. And I think Johnston could have a literally career year, historically good year for a Pittsburgh punter. And I think that's going to help out the defense even more.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to have a historically good punting year for the Steelers. I was shocked to look back through the history, just kind of looking at where Presley Harvin stacked up, and he's like somehow top 3 or 4 punter in the team's history, even though, he was not very good. So
yeah, well, I mean, some of that it's like kicking. As the position becomes more refined, just naturally guys get better. You look at field goal percentage, make rates over the years. The kickers just got to dedicate their craft to it more, and these things always ascend, and numbers just always go up and up, and that will continue. But yeah, I mean, again, Dave and I mentioned this last week, that the punter in Steelers history with the highest gross average ever was in 1960 or so with Bobby Joe Green, and so that's how long ago it was. I'm sure Pittsburgh's the only team that has still a punter holding that record, maybe besides Sammy Baugh in Washington. But yeah, point is, I think Cameron Johnston's going to be a big boost for this defense and for this team overall. Just talk about players we're interested in hearing about in camp. How about DeMarvin Leal? A lot of positive buzz on him. It's a make or break year number 3. That's a guy that I'm still a little skeptical of hearing the reports on, but maybe he has turned things around, seems to be taking things more seriously, really focusing on his technique. And if he can do that, then yeah, there's certainly talent there for him to stick. And so in this kind of also defensive line battle at the bottom, really want to watch Leal in camp.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I'm buying it. It's kind of I'll see it I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing with him, just because last offseason, what was it? He came in and there was a report that his weight was not where it needed to be, and he wasn't maybe taking things as seriously as he should be entering year 2. Tomlin always talks about the jump of after your rookie season, kind of knowing how to prepare yourself, and clearly that didn't go so well for him in his first full off season as a pro. And so, this is kind of do or die time for him. It's kind of the way I see it, at least, that 2 dogs, a 1 bone situation between him and Isaiah Loudermilk. And, if you can't beat out Loudermilk entering his 4th season, that's pretty tough for the trajectory of his career.
Sure. I view it as a battle of the L's. It's Lowry, Loudermilk, Lee, and Leal. I think Lowry's likely to make it given the contract, his veteran experience. I think Loudermilk's above Leal right now, as you said, just because he was above him last year. Lee, we'll see what he's able to offer. They're not going to carry all 4 of those guys. They're going to probably carry 6 defensive linemen. You got Ogunjobi, Hayward, Benton. Adams will make it with his contract. Backup nose tackle, that's 4. Probably carry 2 more. I think Lowry's got good stranglehold on that 5th spot. That 6th spot, I think, becomes wide open. So really more Loudermilk, Leal, and Lee. Fahok goes in that mix as well, but just hard as a 3rd string nose tackle as it was for him last year. So I think it really comes down to those 4, but probably better frame those 3 for 2 spots. Or really, what would it be? 1 spot, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. And for Leal, it's always been, his just tweener body type. It's what exactly is his fit within the defense. It never really made sense when he was drafted. It has continued to not make sense. And so I'm kind of working under the assumption that it will continue to not make sense until I'm proven wrong.
He's just got to be more of a technician. I mean, I get the body type, and that's been a concern. They did bounce him around, and that probably was a little difficult for him his rookie year, even early last year in camp. He was still a little stand-up outside linebacker, still hand down, kind of 4-eye, 5-tech, kick inside, 3-tech, and some nickel looks. But I mean, just there's no pass rush move. There's no pass rush juice. His run defense is better than his pass rush right now, which is was shocking to me, kind of the guy he was coming out. I thought it would be the opposite, where the pass rush might be either in the run defense might be the concern with the weight and just kind of being able to anchor. His run defense is still not great, but it's more technical, and he's been able to get off some blocks and make some plays. So can he find that go-to move as a pass rusher, work his hands better? That's going to be really key for him to carve out a role. If he does, there's a role there to be a sub-package pass rusher, but he's got to take advantage.
Yeah, there is an opportunity for whoever wins that role because, Hayward, who knows? Ogunjobi, who knows next offseason. So there's going to be some spots to fill, and you'd like to think that these guys are trying to make the most of that with that in mind.
Yeah, in terms of which defensive lineman are you really confident will be Pittsburgh Steelers 2 years from now, even next year, but I'll just say 2 years. It's Benton. And I mean, I think they'll get something done with Hayward, but there's no guarantee of that. So it's really just Benton right now in terms of guys that you think will be here in, say, 2026.
Yeah. I don't know if I could confidently say anybody outside of Benton right now. And that's a little scary because defensive line is kind of the what makes the defensive system work, really. It frees up the linebackers, stops the run, and we've kind of seen now with Ogunjobi what the free agent market has to offer, and it's usually very high price. And whether or not you're getting, like, Ogunjobi hasn't really lived up to that price. And this past draft, there was barely any defensive linemen that were kind of top of the first round, second round type of guys. You saw Mason Smith go way earlier than expected as a result, and I don't know what next year's draft class has in store, but I sure hope that there's some defensive linemen available.
You and me both. Yeah, it's tough for Pittsburgh to find that body type. It's why I think they've been willing to sacrifice some of that lack of length when they draft guys like Loudermilk and Lee, and they sign Lowry because they still want guys that are height, weight, prototypical 6'4", 300 or so pounds. But they're kind of sacrificing that length a little bit because it's just hard to find that guy that checks all those boxes. So we'll see. Certainly one big camp battle to watch. The last thing, Ross, and I really had to discuss today, and we discuss it so often, but it has jumped back up into the news on Monday. Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco, a TikTok video of him talking to Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels. They're good friends from the Arizona State days, playing together, which is crazy to say because Daniels is a rookie and Ayuk's been in the league for several years. But Ayuk talking with Daniels in a conversation of Ayuk saying they don't want me back, and Daniels going crazy about that, and everyone inferring that this means the 49ers are willing and about to deal Ayuk and they don't want him back. I think it's kind of been blown out of proportion in the comments. We have such little context about it. The phrase in the words 49ers in San Francisco never appeared, never were heard, never were uttered in the entire video. And this could be just kind of a leverage ploy from Ayuk taking advantage of a slow Monday as the offseason really kind of hits its biggest lull. So I don't know. What's your interpretation of these comments from Ayuk?
I guess until he actually requests a trade, which he has yet to do, it's kind of, I'm still working under the assumption that this is all just a negotiation tactic thing. And, the 49ers front office, or John Lynch, the general manager, has said several times their goal is to get a long-term deal done. And, I'm still kind of working under that assumption until there's an actual trade request, and it kind of seems like they're not going to be able to reach a deal. I think what the last we heard was a report from, was it Mike Silver or one of those kind of 49ers beat guys, just saying the current offer, I guess, is $26 million, and there's reports saying that he's looking for $30 million, and so they're not too far off, but I guess that is still, a little ways off. And so I don't know where I'm at with all this. We've been talking about it for so long. And I'm starting to, you see what Omar Khan talked about, freeing up the cap space from Alex Highsmith to at least be ready to make a deal if and when something became kind of available to happen. And, I think some of the beat reporters have kind of said they think the Steelers might wait and see and just kind of play the slow game. And certainly that's what they've done so far. I wrote this morning, it probably just went up a little bit ago, could this thing drag out until in the season? until, maybe like a trade deadline type of situation. I know the Steelers don't have a huge history of making trades in season for players, but there are some examples, not during Omar Khan's tenure, but Levi Brown and Nick Vannett, obviously Minkah Fitzpatrick, and William Jackson III, I think were the most notable examples. Really only Minkah worked out of those four,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's difficult for me to see the Steelers trading for Ayuk, especially if he wants $30 million. I mean, that's going to put him right there at the top of the team's salary cap hits, and that's difficult for me to kind of grasp.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I don't know. I'm tired of talking about it. It's just an endless story that I just want a resolution, no matter what it is. Either sign the new deal or get traded. Like just figure something out there. But I know it's going to probably take some time and deadlines spur action, as Andrew Brandt says. So I'll tell you this though, Ross, and I can't say this as if I had direct knowledge, but I can't imagine that San Francisco told Ayuk, "We don't want you back. We don't want you anymore." I mean, all they've done this offseason, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch just say, "We want to get a deal done. We want Brandon Ayuk back." And of course, you're just kind of saying the right things. You're not going to publicly say you don't want the guy back, but I think they would love to have Brandon Ayuk back. That's what they've been working towards and trying to get an extension done. So my guess is either the latest offer they sent or the Niners said this is as high as we're going to go, and Ayuk is interpreting that as as the team saying we don't want you back, and that's probably where all that is coming from. And it's just the era we're in about using social media for leverage and to try to shape the public narrative, which is fine and fair. And players, I fully support their right to be able to do those things they couldn't have done 10, 20 years ago. But I think it's this is kind of a nothing burger right now that just is filling the void of the lack of NFL news right now.
Yeah, agreed.
So will they trade for him? I do agree with your point that if I'm Pittsburgh, your quote unquote deadline to stop looking for a receiver is the trade deadline, when you literally can't acquire a receiver at any further point. Assuming that nobody else steps up and can be that number two, always keep looking, always keep searching, and never close a door if that's still a need for this team.
Yeah. And, if I think November 5th is the new trade deadline for this season after the league accepted the Steelers' proposal and implemented the pushback of the trade deadline 1 week. And so, you're talking about that's after week 10, I think, or I believe that somewhere in that range. And so if you're trading for a receiver, the cap hit's not going to be as big. And, that they'll obviously know by that point of the season if the guys on their roster are up to the task or not. And so maybe, a team like the 49ers could see, okay, Ricky Pearsall is coming along quicker than expected, or maybe somebody like Jacob Cowing is looking better than expected. I mean, they have so many receivers. If they get to the middle of the season and nobody's injured, and they're starting to think, okay, well, how do we extract some value out of one of these guys that otherwise is probably going to be, maybe released or otherwise, I could see maybe something happening in the middle of the season, potentially.
Yeah, it's just tough to see if the Niners are making a push like we expect them to as one of the top teams, really the top team in the NFC. Are they going to trade away Ayuk in the middle of their run? And then what if they do that and a week later, Samuel gets hurt or McCaffrey goes down or they lose some other big offensive piece? You just really kick yourself. And the Niners have been so close to the Super Bowl, NFC title game 2 years ago before all the quarterbacks got hurt. Super Bowl loss in overtime, narrows the margins last year to the Chiefs. I don't know. I mean, if they really can't get a deal done with Ayuk, then you have to consider that. But I think if they're mid-season and making a run and the offense is going well, I don't think they want to rock that boat and do anything that would hinder their chance at winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yep, that is a good point.
But we'll see. We'll keep talking about it. That's for sure. But I think to your point, at least you go for all these teams, whether you're talking Ayuk and Cortland Sutton, you go into camp and you go through OTAs and see what you have with the guys and who may, be able to replace if you traded, one of those names, and you just kind of get more time to evaluate. And so there's really no urgency or need or desire to make these trades here in June. I still think if it's a receiver for a trade, Cortland Sutton makes the most amount of sense in terms of just things matching up. But this thing's wide open. Things can surprise us, and we'll just see how things go.
Yep.
All right, Ross, anything else here to talk about? Any other storylines you wanted for us to address?
No, I think we covered everything we wanted to there.
All right, so no emails today. Dave and I will be back on Friday. Again, we're going to probably do this Tuesday, Friday. Of course, if any breaking urgent news happens from now until camp, then we'll have an earlier podcast, I'm sure. But we will start to wrap things up. Ross, again, thank you, man, so much for being on the show today and filling in. And be sure to check out the Depot Dive with Ross McCorkle and Joe Clark on Thursday. So thanks, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, now my famous, everyone loves them, perfect outros that I always struggle to do, but I'll get through it here. You can follow Ross McCorkle on Twitter at Ross_McCorkle. Follow Dave Bryan on Twitter at Sealess Depot. You can follow myself on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Got a question, email for the show. You can email us at theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Ross and Alex.